So in this video we're going to go over how to graph linear functions of the form f of x equals b, and what we're going to see is that these turn out to be horizontal lines. So the directions are to graph the functions f of x equal 2 and g of x equal negative pi. So first thing I want to do is establish my axes on which to draw my graphs. Drawing them as nicely as I possibly can. And I know that this is my x or input axis, and this is my y or my f of x or my g of x axis. So I've got my vertical output axis, my horizontal input axis, and let's think first about f of x equals 2. We know that y, when we're working with functions, that y and f of x are synonyms for each other, so y is f of x. So we can also think of this as being y equal to 2 for the purposes of just having a conversation. So this says that y is always equal to 2. So the idea is that if y is always equal to 2, y can never be 0. And the only place that y is equal to 0 is on the x-axis. So for example, if I have a line that comes down through the x-axis, there's a place on that line where y equals 0, and it's right where it crosses the x-axis. So if we're saying that y must be 2, this indicates that y can never be 0. And the only way it can never be 0 is to be parallel to the x-axis, because if it's not parallel to the x-axis, it will intersect it. So I know I need to draw a line that is parallel to the x-axis. Notice again, like in the previous videos, I didn't bother to put any tick marks in here yet. I just draw the graph, and the moment I draw this graph, if this is the function right here, f of x equals 2, that tells me that this distance between the line and the x-axis is what I'm indicating as 2 units. So I can come in kind of after the fact and label this with a 2. It might even make sense to have things in a little bit different color. Let's see if I can get at my ink color. Maybe switch over to black. So I put my tick mark here in black so it's easier to see. So that would be at a height of 2 above the x-axis. So the moment I do that, I've established a scale. So now I look at my other function. I have the function g of x equals negative pi, and we know that pi is about 3. So if pi is about 3, and I've established this as a height of 2, I know if I come down here to 2, that 3 would be here, and pi, because it's 3.14, is going to be a little bit past negative 3. So I would just draw in a line that's just a hair past negative 3. That's probably a little too much past negative 3, but again, I think the spirit of these is just to get a reasonably accurate picture. They don't need to be insanely accurate. If we needed something insanely accurate, we would use software to do the graphing for us. So this is my function g of x equals negative pi. And again, it has to be parallel to the x-axis, because if g of x is always negative pi, which is close to negative 3, that indicates that it can never be equal to 0, and the only way for it not to be 0 is to not intersect the x-axis, which means that it cannot, it must be, parallel to the x-axis so as to not intersect it. So there's the graph of the two functions. The other thing that we want to talk about is the domain and range of each function. So for the function f of x, let's talk about it first. So the domain of f of x. So clearly it goes infinitely far in either direction parallel to the x-axis. So the x values are going from negative infinity to positive infinity. So x is running over the interval from negative infinity to positive infinity, and for the range, those are the outputs, and the outputs are the f of x values. So f of x, And notice f of x is only ever one value. It's only equal to 2. So it isn't I'm not going to get an interval of values. I'm just going to get a set that contains just 2 in it. The only output my function gives me is a 2. And g of x is going to play out in a similar way. It's running infinitely far to the right, so x is going to positive infinity, and it's going infinitely far to the left, so x is going to negative infinity. So we know that the domain is going to be x is an element of the interval from negative infinity to positive infinity, and the range where the outputs are going, and the outputs are g of x. So g of x is an element not of an interval, but rather just of a set that contains one element. It is g of x is an element of the set that contains just negative pi. So there's the graph of the functions, and we've included the domain and range in our conversation. We double check it one more time to make sure we would get good credit on an exam. I've labeled my lines so that it's clear which is which. I've labeled my axes, x and y. I have arrows on each of the axes and each of the linear functions. So it looks like a reasonable graphical depiction of my functions.